Now, let me ask you a question. Why are we more likely to eat a biscuit with a smiley face on it? When there's a smiley face iced on the biscuit, why does it appeal to us more? The answer is that very often we're just making automated, subconscious decisions based on emotions. Joe Wheller is next up, and he's going to explain this to us. Joe is the MD of Crowdemotion, which is a diverse company of psychologists, engineers, scientists, helping clients reframe their thinking, to redefine challenges, and retool with artificial intelligence. Joe is the MD. He has 19 years' experience in this field. He's worked client-side, agency-side. He's worked for the BBC. He's worked in Vietnam. So, Joe, please can you tell us about how machines can understand emotions and how we can use biometric AI to understand our audiences.
Do my best. All right, thanks very much, everybody. I know some of you were thinking you were going to have lunch. You're wrong. We're locking the doors. You just got me for the next half an hour. Okay. But if anything, I'm going to tell you a little story at the beginning, and if you have to leave because your stomach is calling, I understand that. We're emotional people, and we're kind of governed by what's happening inside rather than necessarily what's happening outside. But as mentioned, I was working in Vietnam for a few years, and I was doing, my background is market research, and doing lots of research on whether people like new product ideas, whether they like new advertising ideas, new concepts, etc. But Vietnam is a market where if you ask people on a scale question of liking, for example, like strongly agree to strongly disagree, most people just strongly agree or like something. So we would get visitors perhaps coming from somewhere arguably a little bit more literal, like Switzerland, to come in and they get the results and say, 85% of people want to eat my product. And it's, well, not really, okay? People aren't going to do that. I could put a picture of my feet in front of these people, and 85% of people will say, I like my feet, okay? It's not because my feet are special. It's because the way that people culturally respond to scales in the market research sense, the rational response, what's in their mind, gives them this score, which is very, very positive. So I started to explore, could there be other ways of understanding whether people are really feeling something about a product or a concept that's put in front of them? So I started getting involved in the emotion tech so that we could get a sense then of whether people actually say they like it, do actually feel they do like it. And if you put those together, if you put the see and the feel together, you've got a much stronger predictor for whether people are actually going to like something or get involved in something. So that's kind of how I got involved. And if that's kind of a key takeaway for the emotion tech, the way that we're using it at the moment is to help companies and help brands understand whether what they say is married up with what they feel. And if you can put those two together, you have a much, much stronger prediction for whether they're actually going to be engaged or be involved. So I came back from Vietnam to the UK and was still looking to see how to get involved in the emotion tech. And Crowdemotion was being built up within the BBC, actually. It's sort of incubated there. And they're doing a lot of work in terms of media, in terms of trailers, all that kind of work. And they have a bigger picture about trying to move emotion tech into and AI into other fields like healthcare, finance, etc. Under the principle that really that computers are not that bright, even within artificial intelligence. In a way, artificial intelligence is kind of replicating the rational processes that we put before it, but not really understanding why we're doing that. As humans, what is our emotional attachment to that? A lot of things that we do are really governed by our emotion rather than some rational output, whether we're happy with something, whether we're sad, whether we're frightened. And the overriding principle for Crowdemotion is really to use the media sense and the creative part of the work we do is to teach computers how to respond to human emotion. And if computers can respond to human emotion, they should become better at interacting with us as people, because really that's how we interact with each other as well. Okay? So I'll give you a couple of examples in here, and they're not necessarily particularly clever, but candy during Halloween in the US, study proved, which was the most sales, Reese's Pieces, not because of any special particular promotion, not because of any special pricing, but the background to the report comes back down to Halloween is kind of orange, and so is Reese's Pieces. Now, it's not really particularly mind-blowing as such, but what I like about that example is kind of indicative that in many respects we are quite simple. Some aspects of our being, our human being, is to be quite simple, and we do react in a way that isn't rational. And yet if you ask people about why they purchase things, it was because it's the right price, or it was a promotion, or they like the taste of it, etc. Really the connection seemed to be more about the extent to which orange matches orange. So I'm also doing something right now which to introduce you guys. I don't know whether you can tell. It's just the way I move, something like that. I'm not sure. Glasses. Lots of stuff about research into wearing glasses, and you can tell. Not very honest. Very honest, right? Not very smart. Very smart. It works all the time. I've got lots of friends who actually said, why don't you get laser treatment? I said, it doesn't work that way. I do lots of presentations of data and market research. I come across as much more credible in meetings with the glasses on, and people treat me in a very different way when I've got my glasses off. It's quite funny. So, it's funny for me anyway. Sadly, it doesn't say witty or good-looking either. But anyway, we've got the glasses. We influence things all the time. And this kind of comes back to some sort of theory about brain. I mean, there's lots of things you can say about brain theory, but for me, it comes back down to some sort of basic levels. Early days of early beings, fairly basic, reptilian minds, the fight or flight kind of stuff. Do you want to eat it? Do you want to run away from it? That kind of stuff. Perhaps the higher level stuff, which is more mammalian, where you might have the sort of social being, if you like, the pack dimension to things as well. And then moving on to the sort of human side of it, where we actually have greater capability for abstraction and language and planning, etc. But how we think about things and how we react to things is still often in this, what's often termed as this sort of old brain system 1, because it's a very, very fast processing technique. We take all the experiences we've ever had in our lives, essentially, which has gone into our brains, and then we process that very quickly and react. Sometimes not very sensibly, sometimes quite illogically, but nonetheless we react very quickly in that respect. The logical aspect of it is an overlay, really. The humans have an overlay across their brains. So when we're looking at things rationally, you might think, well, I'm going to make this rational decision about this, or I'm going to think about that. But quite often, what's actually guiding us is coming from a deeper down. It's a sense of what's right. It's fight, flight, or not. Okay. And there's been various people who have sort of looked into how much thought in a human being is conscious. I don't know, to be honest, how they do these things and how they measure this exactly. I mean, scientists, what do they know, right? But it's looking at the level of bits of information, if you like, processing through the human mind. And there's at least one estimation where it is really very, very tiny. So at the moment, you're perhaps using some of that tiny bit of your mind to listen to me and wonder what on earth he's on about. But the rest of your brain has got a whole load of other stuff going on. And the things that are being processed in your mind right now are much, much broader than any kind of communication that I'm doing. So what's happening to you, really, is much, much broader than that. It's much subconscious from that. It's not just not a straightforward reaction. So I'm going to try a little experiment. It might not work. As they say, don't work with children, animals, or people in media. So let's see what it is. Well, I'm going to show you a few pictures. Okay, this is the test, right? I'm going to show you through a few pictures, and you guys have got to kind of remember what I showed you, okay? A little countdown for you as well, just in case. It's quick. Gone. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. You can if you want to. You don't have to, but it makes it easier for me. Who saw the boat? Okay. Good. It's pretty big. Who saw a spider? Vast majority of people. Who saw the house? Was there one person at the back who saw the house? You weren't really watching. But anyway, the main thing here was that it's a spider. The spider is what most of you said, also recognizing a boat. Perhaps we're all into luxury boats. But the analysis from this study is looking at how emotions, if you like, are what I call the bouncers to your brain. There are some things that trigger things with us, and some things we will take notice of more because our brain is affected by them. Spiders have sort of a historical connection with humans being potentially scary, potentially frightening. Fear is a massive motivator for people. So out of a scanning of a number of items, the one that was most fearful, the instinctive part of our mind, even though I only showed it to you for a very, very brief second, it triggered that was the memory. Everyone remembers a spider, and it's lower for the boat, and fortunately no one remembered the house because it wasn't there. So fear is, if you like, or these emotions are a bouncer, like I'm talking about like a nightclub bouncer, basically. Will they let information in, or do they not let information in, okay? And if you can get the emotion right, you can let these ideas come into the mind because the emotion is letting them sit within your mind. It's about the theory of how memories are laid down. And when we're talking about communications and advertising, when you want to get a message across, you obviously want these messages to go in, and you want them to sit with people and not just be remembered for a few seconds, okay? So, in order to pull these kind of things together, we've developed a number of technologies. One is in eye tracking. It's not original, of course. We've got some patents, though, in terms of doing it web-based, so it's non-invasive. We can launch this anywhere. We're doing studies right now in Vietnam and the US, all across the world, really. And, of course, we can see what people see just through a simple camera on a laptop, so it makes it very easy to see. And we can watch what people are doing. Okay, there's a little video here, PowerPoint and videos and presentations. You never know what's going to happen. There's no sound. It's just to give you an example of what happens. This is what we kind of track. The blobs are probably obscuring it, but it's a Microsoft communication. On the right-hand side, you sort of see the ups and downs. This is what we call the relative levels of attention. It's the extent to which people are looking at what's in the screen as opposed to looking away and doing other things. Okay? It starts to tail off as people sort of get it, and starts falling away further. And then we start seeing the Microsoft branding. And as the Microsoft branding continues, people pay increasingly less attention. Nothing against Microsoft, it just happened to be the way this communication worked. But, so this is kind of what we're trying to find out here. One of the key elements, of course, people have to see the communication. So what we're doing is the eye tracking to understand where people are focused. So there's a level of attention is one thing, okay? And from that, we get vaguely interesting stats about what's happening. So for example, over here, we've got the Microsoft logo. In terms of the light sort of purple bar here, that's how much time the Microsoft logo was on screen during that communication. Okay, so much bigger than, for example, when the team play was on, when the Office 365 running around on the beach thing was happening. But in terms of what people actually were looking at specifically, it's not much different. Okay? And similarly, in terms of the proportion of people who looked at those different communications, even though these parts were on screen much less, it was looked at almost as much as the logo side of it. So we're not really particularly interested in this particular communication as such. But it's important to understand then when we're looking at different kind of communications and looking at different stories, it's like if you are storytelling are people paying attention to the bits that matter? And if you're creating attention, if you're trying to create a message, can you curate it essentially? Can you create it in a way that people are actually going to look at those parts? And quite often you've got companies, we've been discussing it this morning in terms of different kind of realities, different kind of communications. Do you cut things down to little bite-sized chunks and flood it out? What were those chunks? What are the chunks that people are responding to? We can check that out with eye tracking. So that's what people pay attention to. But what really matters is the emotion side of it, because when people have a sense, as we all do, some sort of emotions, is quite often when people are faced with decision-making, it's often the emotion that takes precedent over the actual rational thought. And sometimes you get that if you're faced with lots of different kinds of choices you've got to make, faced with a supermarket shelf, for example. Sometimes it's not so much which is the best offer, it's too hard to calculate which is the best one. Unless you're a student, you're calculating the value of the alcohol that you're going to buy and stuff like that, which often is much more involved. But generally, if you're buying coffee, which one do you feel about? Which kind of coffee brand do you feel for? And it's the emotion that kind of takes over. And we can see that even in terms of our activity. You know, just in this classic example with the cats and stuff, with our phones now, we've got so much more going on in our phone. In fact, as I understand it, more processing power in our phones in our pocket today than put people on the moon. And yet none of us, or not many of us, are putting people on the moon. Most of us are really just looking at cats and sticking things on Twitter and generally talking to each other like that. So we've got all this wealth of information, all this wealth of technology capability, and really it's just emotional. We like to communicate and we like to look at funny things. That's the basic sort of level that we sometimes come to. Emotion takes over the reason bit in many respects. This is an interesting case then of when, is that important? Should we just make lots of advertising with cats in? That can work, I think. But it's very useful to understand emotion if it becomes predictive, if you can sort of get a sense then of how the emotions then are going to react or how people are going to react to things. This is a study we did in the previous US election. And we showed the video to people who we didn't know what their voting was going to be. It was before the actual election itself, so what they finally voted for was going to be completely unknown to us. Then we went back to the same people afterwards to find out what they actually voted, and we've been able to go then back to these plots to find out how people reacted. So this sort of funny greeny kind of colour is the Trump voters, and the purpley bluish kind of colour is for the Clinton voters. This is how it played out on that funny clip.
You know, it is. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Regardless of your own personal politics or what you thought of the election and Trump and all that kind of stuff, it's quite interesting to identify that when we're able to sort of assess how people responded in a happy way or a laughing way, it directly linked back to what they actually voted for. So had we known that these people, we could have said these people aren't going to be voting for Trump, and we could have said these people aren't going to be voting for Trump, and we could have plotted that back in terms of proportions and sort of made an estimate for the proportion of people who perhaps are going to be voting for Trump. Obviously, this is just one clip. There's a much longer parts of it that, you know, obviously do affect the voting in the longer term. So it's quite interesting that emotions, I'm not just talking about emotions because we like to feel and we're humans and we're very feely people. The emotions are actually practical. The emotions that we have in terms of the marketing and communications are important because we can predict what goes on. This is from a big study which we did with the BBC, which is looking at a number of different trailers for different programs they are producing. So the trailer is just a short clip, sort of the 15-second kind of clip about why you should watch that. And we measured people's reactions. One of the emotions we're kind of tracking is puzzlement, or you could call it being intrigued or something like that. And you can plot them out and sort of get that overall, there's some outliers that don't work as well, but overall, if people were being intrigued or puzzled by this particular output, this trailer, then it turned out they were much more likely to actually watch the program. So again, having a handle on what the emotions are gives us a sense of how likely, or a better sense of whether it's going to be successful in the market. We've done, obviously, having come out of parts of the BBC, the Crowdemotion thing, we've done lots of work with them to see how that's produced success in different markets for the kinds of rights and different programs that play in different markets. It's a good way of getting a sense of what's going to work and what's not going to work. So that it ties in there. This video is just a bit odd, but I think the idea here is that he's doing a magic trick, and that even the monkey's a bit surprised and shocked, and then a little bit pissed off at the end as well. But the idea about measuring the emotions aspect is coming through faces, and again, I think now people are getting more and more aware, of course, that you can sort of measure people's emotions through their expressions, and I think you notice that day to day in how we interact. Of course, you could be smiling at me, and inside you could be saying, "Please stop, I'm hungry." Okay, that's fine. We do disguise our emotions through our expressions as well. But also, if you're in a sort of a one-on-one situation, or if you're just looking at a computer and looking at videos, our expressions are coming through in our faces. If we see other people and they're crying, we've got a sense they're probably sad, and we don't we act accordingly. If they're smiling, it's a different kind of reaction as well. And there's been various studies on whether these emotions are innate, are they cultural, and all the rest of it. Of course, there are changes or differences between different cultures. But some of the core emotions seem to hold true, that if you smile in Vietnam, it's pretty much the same as if you smile here in most cases. People are generally happy, okay? And this is what we see over and over again. And so what's what we try and measure through our aspect on artificial intelligence, which is facial coding, again, just measured through webcams to make it easy, make it scalable. We can reach out across different markets and do it very fast. It's trained through a database to understand whether whether they are happy, whether they are puzzled, whether they're exhibiting fear, etc. So we're measuring these expressions, and we have an estimated outcome of whether they're feeling more or less of this particular emotion at any particular time. It's not mind reading. So I mean, I've had some questions about people, can you tell me what they think about my particular product? It's like, I'm not in their head. I can't measure, I can only measure the expression, and that's all I can do, right? But we're getting a sense of how people are reacting to something by measuring the expression on their face, whether they're positive or negative towards it. So I'm going to show you this video here. This is Eli Manning. He's an American footballer. He's got a brother called Peyton, who's a bit older. And they both play American football, both hugely, hugely successful. The older brother, who happens to hold more records than the younger brother. But the younger brother, at this point in time, had been involved in 2 Super Bowl winning teams, whereas the older brother had 1. So if you think of a sibling rivalry, I don't know if you've got siblings, if you've got sibling rivalry, who's got the most? It's always a check and balance about who's got the most going on. So Eli had already been quite pleased, I think. I mean, we don't talk normally, so I don't know whether he was really pleased, but I suspect in his mind he's quite pleased that he'd had 2 winners, whereas his older brother, who had other records, only had 1. This is him. This is a video of him watching when the brother scores the touchdown and allows them to win, and catch up with him, essentially. So sibling rivalry coming there, we saw a lot of surprise, we saw a lot of anger come through and a bit of disgust coming in. So you kind of get that reaction as a sense from yourselves, even from a distance, that sometimes what we feel, and of course I'm sure afterwards he was really happy for his brother, right? Because his families get back together and it's really happy. But in that moment, thinking, damn, he's just taken away the point that I had leverage over him over that particular aspect of it. So this is kind of what we do. We take videos of people and we measure their reactions, get a sense of how they're feeling about the particular thing they're seeing. Generally, we don't film people in stadiums. That's generally not such a thing. We generally do it in more research environments where they've actually agreed for us to film them, because we're all concerned about that sort of thing these days. We don't just randomly film people and try and analyze them. And here's just to clarify, we're not filming you right now, so don't worry. Here's another video which amuses me anyway, so fine.
Oh my goodness. This one has been living in there a very, very long time. I'm not going to need to eat for a week after this one.
It's making you hungry?
Pound for pound.
There's lunch, everybody.
Insects like these contain more protein than beef or fish.
So this is quite a fun video. But obviously, most people interpret that stimulus material to be quite disgusting. It's quite disgusting eating a worm or a grub, whatever you call it. The fact that it explodes as well, all over his chin, I mean, that just takes the biscuit on that. Well, not a biscuit, but whatever, takes the grub on that. But it's interesting when we measure the emotions. I mean, you guys were even laughing as well. Is that this yellow bar here is really happiness, and we have the sort of fear and disgust that come through as well, of course. But quite often these things, when you think about it in terms of what you think is what's being showed, if you like, what is the stimulus material, is disgusting. Do people always react in that way? Our emotions are complex. People can react to it in many different ways. As you all felt here, a lot of you were laughing at it, even though it was disgusting. So disgusting things can make people laugh, as we know from childish toilet humour. It works because it's disgusting and it's also funny simultaneously. So that's what our system does. We're trying to identify, not necessarily are you strictly speaking happy, but what is the mixture of emotions that come from any material. And the most important thing for us really is overall, how engaged are they with a particular piece? And this wasn't measured on you guys, of course, it wasn't live, but in terms of the audience who we showed this to previously, when you get that sort of big spurting moment, that tends to be the bit where everyone sort of go, whoa, and has a big reaction. And that's kind of what we're looking for in media and communications, is not necessarily always having to have exploding worms, but where is that engagement happening? Where are those peaks? Where are those troughs? Where are we actually engaging people? Where are people drawing in? And if we are drawing them in, are they happy about it? Are they rejecting it? Are they sad about it? Are they likely to be engaged in a kind of positive way? So that's kind of what we're trying to do with the facial coding. Okay. I think there's a bit that goes after. There we go. So in terms of the bigger picture of what Crowdemotion is doing at the computing side of it, there is that logical response, which is what a lot of artificial intelligence is focusing on, if you like, the outcomes. Can we predict how people are going to click through, the purchasing, these kind of standardized metrics based around behavior. But that often doesn't really explain what motivated them to do that. So we're building up models based around behavior, but we're not really building up the model based around how people were feeling and make that predictive. So what we're trying to do with the modeling is, obviously, the eye movements is, were they actually following the material itself? From the facial expression, we're getting a sense of what affected them. We also do collect, in terms of the studies, about whether people responded to what you said. We use implicit testing on that, and we gather the expressions. Hopefully, in combining these all together, we have much stronger models to understand how people are going to react to communications. And as the gentleman who was presenting earlier, he was talking about the jumping out of the plane and the parachute. If you know about the media beforehand, before you launch it, you have a better understanding of what's going to work and therefore make the media more efficient. It's exactly the kind of thing that we're doing here too, to understand it through the emotion. So how we've been using it? There's two sides of it. I'm just described two elements. I know you're gearing up to get for lunch, so I'm just going to whip through them. Personalization aspect, there should be an aspect of, if you like, what people keep calling hyper-personalization about things, but it really just is personalization. We did an example with Spotify where we were able to look at what kind of music people liked and they get the reaction and then play back playlists built around that emotion aspect. We've done computer games where, again, it's deciding which journey you're going to go on, understanding from that your face and where they would go. But most of what we're asked to do is in terms of optimization, which is looking at the advertising side of things. It's just a line graph. I'm sorry, I'm just market research background. It's a line graph, hooray. But this kind of chart here is through, I think it was actually a Kellogg's advert that we were doing for this one. The emotional engagement very high at the beginning. As it falls away, it's not really very much. You compare that to what people are actually looking at, which is the distraction. As people are less engaged, or if you like, as people get more distracted, people get less engaged. So this is just an example. It's not going to convert you here or convince you, but the idea here is we've got a whole range of statistics that we can look at. Are people engaged? Are people watching it? Where are the correlations between this to understand what's working and what isn't working? And that's really what we're trying to do with the technology and with the analysis that we're running, is to understand what is working and how can we make it better. And this is kind of how it plays out in, if you like, an actual video. This is Kendall Jenner, and she has no trousers. Oops. Oh. Are you able to play the video? So it's not necessarily, I'm not giving examples of the world's best advertising as such, But you can kind of, there is the joke in there, you know, she's more worried about getting her lipstick than she is wearing the trousers, which, you know, is vaguely amusing. So at the beginning, we sort of see her getting up, and people, in terms of engagement, we get quite low levels, because to most people watching the ad who don't even recognize her, mostly it's sort of just, there's a person getting up and putting some clothes on, so what? Then the story becomes more real, as they understand what's beginning to happen. They start to anticipate she's coming out the house, she hasn't got her trousers on, what the reaction is going to be. We sort of see this fear and sadness come around, as there's an empathy, I think, to how people are reacting. It'd be embarrassing for me to walk out, do this presentation with no trousers on. And then the payoff, if you like, the story as it kicks off. And we combine that, so you've got the emotion down here, we combine that with the eye tracking, so we can kind of also see what people look at, what they're reacting to, okay, so in combination. So that's kind of where we're getting to in terms of video communications, is to understand what people look at, how they react, and then we also ask implicit questions to understand whether or not it changed their opinions about the brand traits. So we're doing some work for a pharmaceutical company where they wanted to appear to be less selfish and wanted to be more humane. So they were doing some communications, and we were able to establish that when people looked at it, the emotional creation did trigger this being less selfish and more humane. So that was positive for them. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we do studies where the brand is not so thrilled with the results, but that's the way it goes. So this is like a final sort of example here in terms of creation, because one of the things, even though quite often we're being brought in too late, if you like, we're being brought in when things have already been done and it's been released and it didn't work as well as people wanted, and so they come along and ask us, say, why didn't it work? And we go into the reverse way round. Ideally, we would like this more to be at the front end, which is more of a creative tool. Though I'm coming from a market research background, Crowdemotion is coming more just from a general sort of emotion development perspective and could be involved in creativity. But there's lots of words on here. But the basic thing is, there was a trailer, if you like, a short film, 20 minutes about nature, etc. And it was cut, first of all, by a creative person. So they edited it down into a version that was just done by a professional creative director. We did one just based around our algorithm, okay? Not so good overall. It wasn't that great. We're not pretending that is the case, okay? A creative director of years of experience, and obviously is human, should be a lot better than an algorithm in that sense. But then they went away and took the results from the algorithm with what they'd done and put it together about where the peaks and troughs were in terms of what people were engaging and what they weren't engaging with, and they came back with something that was even more powerful. So I think for me, this is a key message to people in the sort of in media space, if you like, is if you want it to work well, if you want to make impactful communications, you can use emotion AI, fuse that with human eye, I suppose, and come out with a much better result. And that's what we're trying to achieve overall. That's it, really. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for staying.
Fascinating stuff there, I'm sure you'll agree. So hugely powerful technology we've heard about today, and really we just want to see cats and be happy
Basically.
and eat.
Yeah.
Maybe not grubs, maybe lunch. Before we break for lunch, do we have any questions from the floor?
What's for lunch?
Okay, hold on one moment and we'll just get you a microphone. Then it would be really helpful if you could say where you work and what your name is so that we can get some context.
Hi, my name is Mariana. I work in Chile at Unicom Group. And thank you for the presentation. It was really inspiring. And I was wondering what's going on with social media when it comes to velocity, and you need to go through this information. How can you deal with that?
Yeah, so if I'm right in understanding, how are we understanding how video content or other content works in a sort of social media environment?
And when you need to have the ad very quickly.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, there's speed of deployment because it's all web-based. It's just very fast to get things done. So basically, the thing that we've got it set up, we've got if you like, a portal or a dashboard or whatever you like, where you can just simply upload the stim, like a video piece of content. There's a little thing that you can sort of drag and drop, you know, like the Microsoft example, if you remember that bit, where the people were looking at Microsoft or not looking at the Microsoft logo, you can draw what we call areas of interest around the bits that you're interested in very quickly. And then you can launch it through a survey that can be launched through, if you like, getting reaction from Facebook or from a sample or from a panel or whatever you want to do, and then you get the results back quickly. The only limitation in speed, really, is about how fast or how many people you can get to respond. So I guess what you're aiming to get a reasonable balance is at least 150 or so people to be able to view that content. And that can be done in a day. Or if you're looking for very specific groups of people, sometimes it can take 10 days. I'm doing a study right now for people who use a specific brand of German fragrance. Quite hard, as it turns out. So it's taking about 10 days. But if you can find people who are like, general people, then you can do it very quickly.
Hello, Julia from Inskin. Loved that, really, really great. Question on, was it Bear Grylls eating that widgety grub? Is that what he's called? Yeah.
You want some, don't you?
Definitely not. But you're doing eye tracking as well. So something like that, I'd look away. I'd be disgusted, happy, and revolted, but I'd be looking away. So would that on your chart show that I'm disinterested because you've lost me?
That's right, to some degree, yes. I mean, I guess that's working with samples in the sense that some people react in different sorts of ways. Some people are intrigued, they watch more closely because it is kind of unusual, or some people look away because it is so disgusting. So yes, it would show up that way. There's no way we can get around that in the end. We won't be able to see what's inside your head as such. I can only sort of respond to how people are moving. So again, when it comes to interpretation and any kind of insight really is to understand what is being shown and what are those results and what do those mean together to understand the full picture. So we could say in this example, if we saw a big dip coming when just at the moment where it was up, we could say, well, actually, it's probably not people aren't interested, people are probably just looking away. On the whole, most advertising and most communications aren't disgusting and aren't foul because most brands don't go down that road. So we don't find that very often, but I imagine there could be cases where that would be an issue, yeah.
Okay, please all join me in thanking Joe. Very interesting.
Thank you.